In 1692, a small village in Massachusetts began to believe evil was hiding among them, not in the forests, not in distant lands, but inside their homes, inside their church, inside the faces of their neighbors. Soon, Salem began asking one terrifying question: who among us is working with the devil? But this is not only a story about witches. It is a story about fear, suspicion, power, and what happens when accusation becomes truth. This is the story of the Salem Witch Trials.
When people hear the words Salem Witch Trials, they often imagine witches, curses, and superstition. But the real story is even more disturbing. Because Salem was not only about people hunting witches. It was about a community turning against itself. It was about fear spreading faster than truth. And it was about a court system that allowed invisible claims to decide real human lives. In 1692, Salem Village began asking one terrifying question: who among us is working with the devil?
To understand Salem, we have to enter the world of Puritan New England. This was a hard world. The winters were brutal. The forests were unfamiliar. Disease, war, hunger, and death were never far away. For the Puritans, the world was not divided only between the natural and the supernatural. They believed the devil was real. They believed evil could enter ordinary life. A failed crop, a sick child, a dead animal, a strange pain in the body. All of it could be seen as a sign of spiritual danger. But Salem Village was also under pressure from within. Families argued over land. Neighbors fought over church leadership. The village was divided by old resentments, local politics, and religious tension. Under the surface of this small community, fear had been building for years. And in the winter of 1692, that fear found a target.
The Salem Panic did not begin in a courtroom. It began inside one household. Inside the home of Reverend Samuel Parrish, two young girls began acting in ways no one around them could explain. Today we might ask about illness, stress, trauma, or fear. But in Salem, the explanation became something far more dangerous: witchcraft.
The first strange events began in the home of Reverend Samuel Parris. His daughter, Elizabeth Parris, and his niece, Abigail Williams, began showing frightening symptoms. They screamed. They twisted their bodies. They hid under furniture. They complained of invisible attacks. The adults around them did not know what to do. A local doctor was called, but when he could not explain what was happening, the answer given was not medical. It was spiritual. The girls, people believed, were under an unnatural affliction. Soon, other girls began showing similar symptoms. The fear spread from one room to another, from one family to another. And once the village believed witchcraft was the cause, the next question became unavoidable: who was doing this to them?
When Salem began looking for witches, it did not begin with the powerful. It began with the vulnerable. The first accused were women who already stood at the edges of the community. An enslaved woman, a poor woman, a sick and isolated woman. And once they were named, Salem had crossed a line. Suspicion had become accusation.
The first three accused were Tituba, Sarah Good, and Sarah Osborne. Tituba was an enslaved woman in Reverend Parris's household. She had little protection and almost no power. Sarah Good was poor, often dependent on others, and already disliked by some in the community. Sarah Osborne was older, sick, and had been involved in conflict. They were easy targets. On March 1, 1692, the three women were examined before local magistrates. Sarah Good denied the accusation. Sarah Osborne denied it too. But Tituba confessed. Under pressure, she told a story that terrified Salem. She spoke of the devil, of strange animals, of witches, of a book that people were forced to sign. And most frightening of all, she said there were more witches. Not one, not three, more. That confession changed everything, because if there were more witches, then anyone could be next.
This is where Salem became truly dangerous. At first, the accusations were aimed at people the village already distrusted. But panic does not stay controlled. Once fear is rewarded, it spreads. And soon, Salem was no longer accusing only outsiders. It was accusing neighbors, church members, landowners, even ministers.
The accusations spread quickly. Multiple people were accused. Even Reverend George Burroughs, a former minister, was accused. This was the moment Salem changed. If a poor woman could be accused, people understood that. If an enslaved woman could be accused, people accepted that. But when respected church members, landowners, and even ministers were named, the panic became much more terrifying. No reputation was strong enough. No prayer was proof enough. No innocence was safe enough. The fear had become larger than the facts.
The most disturbing part of Salem was not only that people were accused, it was how the court treated those accusations. One of the most controversial forms of evidence was called spectral evidence. A witness could claim that a person's spirit, or specter, had appeared to them and caused harm. The accused could be standing in the room, doing nothing. But if someone cried out and said, "Their spirit is hurting me," that claim could be taken seriously. Imagine being asked to defend yourself against something invisible.
Inside the courtroom, fear performed itself. The accused stood before magistrates. Witnesses cried out. Girls collapsed. People pointed across the room and claimed they were being attacked by invisible forces. The person they accused might be standing still, silent, confused, terrified. But the court could still treat the invisible attack as evidence. This was spectral evidence, and it created an impossible situation. How do you disprove something only another person claims to see? How do you defend yourself against a ghost? How do you prove your innocence when fear has already convinced the room? In Salem, invisible claims led to real arrests, real imprisonment, and eventually, real deaths.
Salem created a terrible choice. Confess, and you might live. Deny, and you might die. That is one of the darkest ironies of the trials. The people who admitted to witchcraft were often spared because their confessions supported the court's belief that a hidden conspiracy existed. But those who insisted on their innocence became more dangerous to the court. Their denial could be seen as stubbornness, deception, or loyalty to the devil. So in Salem, truth could kill you, and a lie could save your life.
Some people confessed because they were afraid. Some confessed because they were pressured. Some confessed because it was the only way they believed they could survive. Others refused. They would not lie about themselves. They would not admit to a crime they had not committed. They would not save their own lives by destroying the lives of others. In June 1692, Bridget Bishop became the first person hanged. More followed in July, then August, then September. Rebecca Nurse, John Proctor, George Burroughs, Martha Corey, Mary Easty, and many others. In total, 19 people were hanged. They were not burned. That is one of the common myths about Salem. Those executed in Salem were hanged. Giles Corey, the husband of Martha Corey, suffered a different fate. He refused to enter a plea, so he was pressed beneath heavy stones until he died. Others died in jail, waiting for justice that never came.
By the autumn of 1692, Salem had gone too far. Too many people had been accused. Too many respected names had been dragged into the panic. Too many lives had already been taken. And slowly, the question began to change. People were no longer only asking, who is guilty? They were beginning to ask, what if the court is wrong?
Doubts about the trials began to grow. The use of spectral evidence became harder to defend. If the devil could appear in the shape of an innocent person, then how could anyone know whether the accused were truly guilty? The same logic that had fueled the trials began to destroy them. The special court that had handled many of the cases was eventually dissolved. A new court used stricter standards, and as the legal process changed, the panic began to collapse. The remaining prisoners were eventually released, but release was not the same as repair. Families had been shattered. Reputations had been ruined. Children had lost parents. A community had turned on itself. Salem survived, but it was never the same.
Today, Salem is often remembered as a story about witches. But that is not really why it matters. Salem matters because it shows how quickly fear can become authority, how rumor can become testimony, how testimony can become evidence, and how evidence can become execution. The people of Salem did not believe they were doing evil. They believed they were fighting it. And that may be the most frightening part. Because history's greatest warnings do not always come from monsters. Sometimes they come from people who were certain they were right. Thank you for watching.
Next, we travel to the ancient city of Alexandria, a city by the sea, a city of scholars, scrolls, and ambition. Here, rulers tried to collect the knowledge of the entire world. Maps, poems, science, history, every idea worth preserving. But today, its great library is one of history's greatest mysteries. What happened to it? Where did all that knowledge go? And does anything from the Library of Alexandria still exist? Learn more in the next episode of Earth History Retold.